Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the penultimate session of the Climate Finance Academy. I mean, it's very important to start a process, but more importantly, it is more vital that we are able to continue that process and complete it. And so for everyone who has held on, for the first session, second session, and today being the third session, by next week we'll have, our final session. This is me saying well done and congratulations. And as a reminder of how far you have come, I'd like to state it out here today. That the Academy actually, made the call for applications, and we received 1,300 applications, or more than 1,300 applications, and you were part of 100 participants that were selected. So well done to everyone. So I'll go straight in with the housekeeping rules for today's conversation. If you have any questions, please make use of the chat, or we encourage engagement. So feel free to show by raise of hand, and then I'll definitely call you to ask your questions directly to the facilitator during the course of the session. We would have our Q&A session, so please make use and take advantage of it. As you may know as well, we'll be having two exceptional facilitators. Our first facilitator for today is Jevanik Henry, who is a young climate change and development professional with extensive experience working and leading in the development and environmental projects at the national, regional, and multilateral level. Having previously served as the Climate Change Special Envoy for the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and Foreign Service Office with the government of St. Lucia, he played an instrumental role in strengthening ties between United Nations agencies in the Eastern Caribbean and youth-led organizations towards supporting and increasing youth capacity and participation in climate action, particularly on climate change negotiations and accessing climate finance dating back to COP21. He continues to utilize his technical knowledge to support community-based youth entities in St. Lucia in identifying and accessing financing facilities for climate change resilience projects. Currently, he supports the project's management and technical delivery of the Commonwealth Climate Change Program to member countries, including efforts aimed at integrating gender and youth considerations in climate projects developed and wider NDC's implementation. At this point, I would like to welcome Henry. Henry, please, over to you.
Yes, thank you again. And of course, it's a pleasure to always join hands with, Yongo in sharing knowledge. And I think, like you said, this is going to be more of a discussion and not just me, talking, or like they say in the climate world, the blah, 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 but more or less a bit of a knowledge exchange, sharing experiences. So, of course, like you mentioned, sort of speaking based on experiences from the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which is one of the flagship climate initiatives of the Commonwealth Secretariat to support member countries in accessing finance, building capacity, and strengthening policy, and so on. So without further ado, I would just share, I think I can share screen. I would need that to be enabled. And from there, I will take this forward. Yeah, so whilst that is being done, enabling me to share screen, I will share a link to a Mentimeter to just start off our discussion. Okay.
Screen sharing should be working now.
Should be working now, perfect. Yeah. Okay, I think you should be able to see my slides. Right, and yeah. So, yeah, just to start, we would go to this link. I'm sure we're all, I shared the link in the chat as well. I'm sure we're all familiar with the Mentimeter platform. So from the main question, which for now, which we would request is, let me just get this shared on the side. Just a second to share this. Right. What are the main climate funds do you know available specifically for youth and youth-led organizations? So we're going to start with this. Do let me know if there are any challenges in accessing the link, and then we'll take it forward from there. I think the link should be in the chat as well, if I'm correct. Yeah, and also say none is the perfect answer as well. Saying don't know any. Give it another 30 seconds or so, and we would. You see, don't know any, they know the Global Youth Climate Action Fund, UN organizations, NGOs national budget, don't know, government, CIF. Okay, so it's good that we have quite a bit of responses coming through. And of course, we can see from quite diverse sources as well. So it's not just, yeah, I see YSELI seeds. Okay, that's perfect. And the next question on that, now that we sort of identified the main funds available, the next available question would be, just to get an understanding of accessing that. Of course, this is speaking about access into finance. Get a feel of how would you with your knowledge on how to effectively access these funding lines? Because I know, for example, from the youth end, there's always the question of we have the funds, but we don't know how to access it. So just to get, now that we've listed the initial funding lines, just to get an idea of whether you have any knowledge on how to access it, whether I know we have representatives from various youth organizations here as well, individuals as well. So you see little to no knowledge, average, just to get a feel of the level of understanding and knowledge. And again, it's any answer is perfectly fine, very knowledgeable. But I think we can see predominantly the trend is that majority have very little to knowledge. It's very little to no knowledge, which is perfectly fine. And of course, I think we can all agree that that is a consistent challenge, whereby we have some of the funds available, like we identified previously, but there is that challenge in terms of accessing those funding lines. So thanks for that, and thanks for that sort of the interest in and providing the responses in that regard. And of course, that is, we were looking at it from the youth lens, but even globally as well, the global climate finance flows, there are, let's get this correct, that there are, several funds available, the GCF and so on. But there is still that gap. And one of the useful resources which Climate Policy Initiatives releases, CPI, is the Global Landscape of Climate Finance, where you get to see within this image here that the track climate finance flows vis-a-vis what is needed in terms of allowing us to, what do we say, keep 1.5 alive for many of us, and to ensure that we can meet our Paris Agreement targets and so on. So as you can see here, I think if possible, anybody could just tell me one word to describe what this graph displays. Just probably raise your hand, or if anything, just show it out. Yeah. What would you use to describe this graph? Looking at the actual climate finance flows vis-a-vis the what is necessary to maintain 1.5 degrees. Do you feel that this is possible? Is it ambitious? What word would you describe this global graph? You can probably place it in the chat as well, if possible. Any responses to that, to describe this? I don't think I can see the chat, so if there's any responses out, I can. Yeah, challenging, Salaman, very meaningful compared to the needed funding, difficult to achieve, worrisome. And I think, yeah, these are perfect explanations of this, because if you look at it from just looking at this existing gap, and of course, the last decade, there was supposed to be accelerated action, and we're pushing for that. And there is that gap between 2020. Of course, now, the question now would be, in 2022, do we expect that we're able to reach that above 3 billion estimate? And it's only an estimate. Do you see that? No. So I think we can all agree that there is that huge gap. And maybe just as a brief, I will just give a short free inputs as to how we are helping as a Commonwealth Secretariat in terms of helping to bridge that gap and helping countries to access that funding available. So can my screen shift? Yeah, perfect. So like I would have mentioned regarding our climate change program, of course, we focus on predominantly strengthening the resilience of the member countries, and it's encompasses both capacity development, helping in developing bankable project proposals. So a bit later on, I'll speak about the project proposals aspect to it. And of course, we focus on findings both for mitigation and of course for adaptation. Of course, since many of our countries are small islands, more small states and small island developing states as well. So in terms of our focus areas, so there is that work along lands, just on the Climate Finance Access Hub, which I would speak about more. The common sensing in the Pacific, which utilizes what we call Earth observation data. So I'm not sure if anybody is involved in remote sensing technologies, where we sort of use that data to help in developing bankable project proposals and providing that evidence for it. And of course, we try to integrate youth and gender considerations across all of our projects, all of our programmings, and definitely working on low carbon and resilient health sector. In terms of how we operate, just a brief, and I'll mention later on why this is important as well. We adopt what we call a hub and spokes model, whereby we have a central hub, which is based in Mauritius, and we have what's called regional advisors, and we have common of national climate finance advisors who we position in various countries. And that is how we sort of help deliver our technical assistance. So you have that local knowledge, which is critically important. And they are able then to help in supporting developing project proposals, and also from the youth lens as well, youth organizations who are seeking climate finance and so on. We would then provide the support in developing those proposals in that regard. So I would have spoken about our pillars of support in terms of the project development, the policy, and in terms of readiness, preparation, and knowledge management and learning, which is critically important. Of course, stuff like what we're doing here today, as to how we share that knowledge from our various regions. And of course, this here just provides a snapshot of the some of the project progress we've made in terms of funding mobilized. So for example, support countries, may I be clear on that, in mobilizing climate finance. So you see here approximately 50 million US dollars into date, and of course you can see our capacity building initiative, which is a strong component of what we do. So we help facilitate these training sessions. So, and of course we support and lead in these regard. So for instance, I believe yesterday as well, the other working group, there was an NDC exercise as well, which we supported in that regard. So, and of course, like I would have mentioned earlier on, as I get into the sort of key elements of the presentation today, looking at youth and climate change, so that is a key priority for us. So of course, that we try to integrate that in the work of our advisors in countries, and we help supporting the advocacy of our Commonwealth Youth Climate Change Network as well, and others, and in terms of helping them deliver that support and helping them integrate young people, particularly NDC implementation, which of course would encompass being able to access that level of climate finance, which is, of course, like we would have identified earlier on, is much needed. And I think we can all agree on that. I think next slide. Yeah. And I would have mentioned as well, a second one, in terms of both youth and gender are sort of mainstream across all of our programming. So there's that gender and youth. Yeah, and in fact, dating back to COP26 last year, our main side, well, one of our side events was looking at strengthening gender and youth integration in the NDC implementation. So we try to bring the two together, and of course, later on, I'll speak to us to how that is being done. Speaking of knowledge sharing and climate finance, so one of the things we try to produce is that key resources that can help countries, can help organizations improve their knowledge and improve their ability to access finance. So looking of the experiences we've had from the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, we've developed this toolkit which utilizes this, which brings together most of these experiences and to see how it can be utilized as well as a practical guide, essentially, based on the experiences. So it's not just theoretical, but it's actually based on practical experience. And that is available online within the UNFCCC portal, of course, on our website and so on. So now we're going to speak about the climate finance. And of course, we're looking at the role, particularly of young people in that space. I'm not going to spend too much on the challenges. I think we all here know the challenges we face in terms of the long processes, how difficult it is sometimes to get, just to meet the standards to apply to some of those funds. The challenges in accessing climate information. I know that is something that is from our end. It's always a challenge, particularly from the regions that are oftentimes most vulnerable. You do not have the data you need to support your evidence. Of course, resources to upscale initiatives. You may have a particular climate project that you're looking to see. A challenge is there's potential to expand, but there is limited capacity within your organization, your group, to really and truly be able to bring that up to another level. And of course, there will be limited national policies in some cases for direct youth engagement in that regard, whether it be into the climate change committees, climate change policies, and so on. But I mean, the good thing is that I think there are opportunities within that space. I think most of us can probably agree to indicate if otherwise, but that we've seen an increase with the revised NDC submissions, national determined contribution. We've seen that in some cases that there is an increase into integrating youth considerations and including young people in that process. The fact that now that we have more research and innovation is being pushed, and particularly young people are leading that aspects. I mean, I'm sure there are some on this call who would have maybe have in your various countries various climate solutions, which you may maybe in terms of water, energy, and so on. And there is interest from donors. I think you've seen now an increased interest, maybe 10 years ago compared to now, the number of interest-specific funds which are targeting to support youth enterprises, youth green enterprises, youth organizations. I think we'll definitely see are increasing. So that's a positive step. And of course, we have now various new financing instruments which help support that. But the first thing in terms of accessing finance as well, it's always a case where we need to sort of assess the climate finance landscape. So the question always is, where is the money? Before, and you need to first of all understand, what are we applying for? Where are the funding facilities available? And I think without that, it oftentimes it makes it difficult in a sense that you cannot really just go and just develop project proposal and not know who am I targeting? What am I targeting funding lines? What are the facilities available for that? And in fact, one of our key exercises we normally do in our countries, we help in developing climate finance landscape studies, which would then contribute to supporting the climate finance strategies. So in your own organizations as well, there is the potential to see how can you do that sort of a brief assessment of what is available nationally, first of all, also on a regional scale that is accessible, and also on the multilateral scale. So for example, there may be region specific, maybe for example, for the African region, the Pacific region, that there are particular facilities available for them. However, there may be those that are available more on the multilateral level, or even now we're seeing that there are what we call national funds or subnational funds where youth organizations can apply to directly, and then which is a bit easier as well. So these are various instruments that are popping up which can allow you to access that. Of course, like I would have said, limitations in developing that, there is limited information available, and it can be very difficult sometimes to do that landscape strategy. But I think now the global landscape is kind of shaping up to be more open to that. And of course, and like I said, it's an important tool to help support in your advocacy effort, because then you can say that, that these are the funding lines available, if there are 10 or so on, but then what is the rate of young people actually accessing that? And then you can actually pinpoint that gap, and that can actually support in terms of your advocacy efforts. And in terms of, I know we spoke about the projects aspect to it, and I would have mentioned in terms of some of our projects which focus both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And of course, we may mention how the importance of having solid evidence to help develop these bankable projects is a project that can be easily, converted into actual action and so on. And there are some key lessons. Again, I'm not trying to keep it as brief as possible in terms of helping you to help develop your projects. In terms of one, there are existing small schemes available. There's a Just Small Grants program, for example, and there are others at the various national levels. I'm sure you can maybe point out one or two where you'd see this call for applications. I always say if it doesn't cost you to apply for it, go for it. I think that is also as an important aspect in terms of access, because if you don't try, oftentimes, you would not be able to access the funding for that. And it's also important to have an integrated approach and also being able to show be not a sort of an ad hoc plan. So more or less just also in have this one project, but show it part of a wider program. So if, for example, you're focusing on maybe an energy focus within your community or so, and that you would have this, you may develop this one pilot project, but then show how do you intend to sort of take this forward within your wider programming scheme. That also helps in developing that evidence base for your projects and making it more, I guess, attractive for funded facilities as well. Something to also use is that I always say you don't need to sort of reinvent the wheel sometimes, because there would be some organizations or others within your existing groups which may have had success in terms of accessing the funding from various lines. So it could be, a particular organization in another province, which may have had success in accessing funding, maybe from a particular funding private sector organization. Then I think it's always useful to share that knowledge and exchange and find out what are the lessons, what are the key things they utilize. It's a similar way where young people sort of use in terms of accessing some scholarships, whereby you look at alumni and you ask them for advice and so on. Similarly, within the climate finance space, it can actually help in utilizing that existing knowledge. And of course, I would have mentioned the participatory approach. Particularly if you're looking at community-based projects, the community input is always valuable in developing that project concept. Because there's only so much we can know, but oftentimes you always say that the local people have that greater knowledge, and oftentimes and more useful knowledge sometimes the traditional and indigenous knowledge. And being in terms of that participatory approach, it is important to have the social dimensions, ensure that gender and youth considerations are included within your proposed activities. Within the activities, ensure that there's, you ensure that you meet the gender parameters in terms of equality and so on. And of course that you have quite diverse. Interestingly as well, there's a new thrust towards increasing focus on people with disabilities as well. That is also an interesting dimension which can be included within that to help strengthen your proposal within the activities that you are doing. And one of the things, like I would have mentioned in terms of one of our strengths, is that we have these advisors deployed in country to help in developing those context-specific projects. It is always important when designing the activities within your proposals and so on, that they are based on a localized context as much as possible. Of course, if it is a community-based project, in that sense, it looks at the vulnerability from a local context, but also making that link towards the national policies. So whether it is that, what are the priorities, and that will go back to sort of assessing the climate finance landscape and so on. What are the national priorities, for your government or, within the NDCs and so on? If there's a strong focus on maybe climate and health, can you make that link between your project and how that will contribute to the national effort in that regard? So these are all critical things which sort of help in giving that sort of strength to your projects as well. And of course, integration of capacity creation and knowledge sharing. I think, of course, that is central for us as to how the learnings and so on, the experiences, you can share that with others and share that so that other initiatives can help in scaling up, and also replication potential. And that is something which, for example, I would say that, coming from the Caribbean region, where there are quite similarities in terms of the challenges we face in terms of with the Pacific region, for example. And we're looking to see how we can strengthen that knowledge exchange within there, because there may be solutions they're advancing there, maybe solutions we're advancing here, which can help each other, that mutual benefit. So it's always important to have that capacity creation and knowledge sharing embedded within your project activities. I think I'm sharing here. And of course, we'll spoke in terms of the sort of innovative instruments as well. I mean, of course, we know of the sort of various capital funds that are available, and there are new ones coming up as well. It's sort of, that, well, not relatively new, but I guess it's been popular, debt for climate swap and the green bonds and so on. And you may ask, what is the linkage between that and maybe potentially a youth organization accessing finance, since these are normally done at that sort of national level? But within the debt for climate swap, is there a way where we can get a particular focus on maybe green youth-led green entrepreneurship within that space? Is it the case where within those green bonds, we can get a particular bond that is focused on green-based projects from a youth lens, So there is that angle to that where, of course, and that is where the sort of advocacy efforts from youth organizations are critically important in helping ensuring that these national decisions can actually contribute to supporting your initiatives at the different level. And of course, we've seen there are various I mean, we would know, I think I saw one recently for the African region on various financing solutions, yeah, incubators and so, which help support these enterprises. Because at the end of the day, everything, well, now if we have to maintain and to be able to maintain limit to 1.5 and of course achieve our Paris Agreement targets, young people have a critical role. I think we've heard that several times. And within the green entrepreneurial space, yeah, we can have, I think, a useful role to play, particularly, like we said, based on that innovative ideas, that new and innovative ideas which young people bring to the table. And it's also important that we capitalize on these existing facilities, like the incubators, like the accelerators, because oftentimes the main challenge is getting that start. And these facilities sometimes help in being able to get that start required. And I think once that start is gotten, it makes it easier in terms of expanding and replicating. And I think one of the things which I had at the bottom here, I'm not sure if it can be seen. Yeah. Oh, yeah. At the bottom, we say have a diversified financing strategy. In other words, don't depend simply on grants or just one funding per se. Do not target just one funding outlet. Yeah, of course we all want the grants, but then there are various types and various schemes that you can actually look at, and various ways, whether it be from a private sector lens, whether it be from sort of public sector. Are there other foundations, NGOs or so which can actually be reached out to? So have a sort of that diversified strategy. It often in terms of help. It's just like with in business, it's always say that conglomerates can stand through the most difficult of times, because you have that sort of diversified scheme. So that is something to, I think, to also be considerate of. And I think, yeah, that's sort of just, I just want to go on and on and on. So and I know we think we have a Q&A after this, but maybe just to start the discussion, I knew we have quite a diverse pool of individuals here, in terms of course, I think there should be questions as well if I would take in the chat, but just start off with maybe just to think, and of course, open to hear your thoughts on that. What role can you or your organization play in terms of supporting national efforts in improving access to finance? Like we always say that young people have a role, we do. We hear that all the time. But then what do you think your particular role, whether it be from an individual level or an organization level, can actually help? And I think that is important in understanding what is our role, because we each have a particular part to play. And I think from that we can actually help, because at the end of the day, it has to feed into the overall national and regional effort. All right. So yeah, maybe just to start the discussion on there. And I think I will stop there. I think I should probably keep my screen, or I'm not sure, Ms. Moderator, whether.
Thank you, Henry. So the floor is open for conversations and questions if you have any. If you're bold enough, you can turn on your microphones or your cameras as well. Okay, I see Shamim wants to ask a question. Please go on. You can unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you like, and engage our facilitator. He's here for us. He came prepared. So yes, thank you. Henry, you have someone.
Thank you very much.
Shamim from Tanzania.
Thank you. My name is Shamim from Tanzania, and I would like to say that I do appreciate the good presentation that you have done. And regarding the last question of discussion that you just said, like, what is the role that somebody as an individual they can play in helping other young people to access finances? Here comes the problem that we as young people, we have the capacity, we have the ability to do all these things, but it all comes down to our leaders, because they do not see the capacity in us, even though we are trying to show the capacity, especially from these from the global south or these developing countries, is that they don't see you as an individual who can deliver. Personally, I have my own organization that I'm running. It's called Trees for Birthdays. And with Trees for Birthdays, we offer education to young people on how they can raise their own fundings to support climate change or to do actions and activities on climate change. But you find that the government is not, it is not even very supportive when it comes to that, given the fact that we are supporting as young people, but the government is not very supportive. And then sometimes is that some funds might come in for young people, but you find the people that are doing the project are not young people. That is like what is happening. These finances were meant for young people. So it is all about like, how are we going to ensure that we blend in these, the young generation and the governments to ensure that these finances go into the right hands, they go to young people, because they are the generation that is to come. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to point out all these, because it's more like being politicized than everything, honestly. I can give an example if given some time, is that, for instance, in my country, you find that the government is spending like a lot of money, billions of money on buying like these government vehicles. But when it comes to supporting young people with their initiatives and what they're doing, it doesn't care, because, you know, I'm in the government, I am the government, I am the law. So I don't care what this other person on the ground that is going through, because mentally, I have been doing mental health and climate change. Young people are really suffering. You meet them and they're like, you know what, I'm just doing whichever thing I'm doing, knowing that I might die anytime because of all the crises that are happening. The rising of the water sea levels in our country, all the crises, it's just affecting these young people mentally. How are we going to ensure that we blend this all through? Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is quite some useful points on there, and looking at it sort of that gap between the governments and youth organizations and so on. Before I maybe just add one thing, which is I think maybe just from my personal experience as well, it's important for youth organizations to have a sustained presence. Why I say sustained presence, in the sense that, and I would have mentioned previously into the developing project, that you have to be able to show it within a wider scheme and not just an ad hoc initiative. So similarly, in the leadership organization, it is always good to show that you have that footprint. For example, if you're focusing on like maybe health, that you have built that sort of experience, build that sort of stakeholder engagement, because then it makes you a bit more attractive, and that governments could see that, hey, you know, you are impacting society, you have been doing this for a consistent amount of years, and it takes time, there's no question about it. Similarly, within the climate finance field, where you see that sometimes to get accredited to various funding lines takes forever. But at the same time, similarly from a youth organization standpoint, to become attractive and for people for governments and so on to have confidence, they need to be able to see that it's not a fly-by-night thing, but it's actually sustained presence, and there is that ambition to it. I always say to have that sort of futuristic plan, and do not just plan for today, but plan for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. And that is a way where it can, and I would have also mentioned being able to integrate your plans and make the link between your plans and that of the government. And that is why it's important to have an understanding of the national climate finance landscape, or particularly national climate policy, sorry. Because then, of course, you know, from the government standpoint, it's always a case where how would that benefit us? How would that benefit, you know, the people? So if you can make that link between my project in my rural village here, along the lines of maybe building resilience around water, would then mean that the government doesn't need to spend money in building, I mean, water tanks or whatever, you know, because you are now being able to access that. Then you will be integrated within, there would be sort of support, you know, in the sense that you can then reach out to support that, hey, if we are able to roll this out, we can get young people employed in that project. And that is sort of taking a burden away from you as well. And it's all that mutual benefit. So I think it's important to be able to show how that there's that mutual benefit. It will help build that relationship, and it's not something that happens over time. I can tell you, it takes overnight, so it takes time for sure. But there are positive cases across the globe where you can see there are integration of young people, youth organizations within that space. Yeah. I saw.
Shamim, I hope he responded to your question.
Yes, he did. But I just wanted to like put like one last bit of it, is that what if the policy, for instance, the environmental policy, does not support, like it doesn't support, though it is, they're trying to bring it in. I'm talking of an example of Tanzania, though they're trying to bring it in and everything. What if the environmental policy does not like support young people? It doesn't talk about youth. How do we again try to convince the government that does not give priority to these young people? How do we convince them to be a part of the activities and actions that we are doing?
Yeah,
Check.
yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I think one of the things which, again, looking from my experiences as well, it's always useful to, like I said, having that sort of demonstrated influential capacity, you know, being able to show that you have that experience and being able to show that you can actually make an impact. So in other words, then it's being seen to an extent that you cannot not be seen anymore, if you get where I'm coming from. So in other words, that if you have that impact in the community, they cannot not, and I know, of course, from young people, and we be able to mobilize people, and we are seen as I don't want to say a threat, but we can be game changers, let's put it that way. So it's important to show that you have that mobilization capacity. Again, it was, like I said, you will start small. It will maybe be two people in the organization trying a small scale project. But even if, as long as, of course, I know there are certain cases where the policies, like you said, are not very open to that. But there are small initiatives you can do within the community level. And if you focus on that and you sort of build how they call it, a community of people who are interested, then you become more influential in the national landscape. And then eventually you'll be invited to sit on the committee, you'll be invited to be able to actually, of course, in some cases it's not the case. It can be totally opposite, where we have to be realistic. But at the same time, it would provide you with that opportunity, I think, having that demonstrated influential capacity at the community level to be able to sort of shift the needle at the national level with that experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But it takes time, like I would say, yeah.
All right, Henry, there's a question in the chat. I'll just read it to you. It says, this is
bankable,
from
yeah.
Aya. Can you please elaborate on what is meant by bankable? I frankly have an issue with the word bankable when it comes to climate finance. And I think that's what's hindering the amount of flows, is precisely looking for profit within climate projects instead of dealing with crisis, especially when it comes to adaptation.
Yeah, that is our. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, that is a question which oftentimes comes up, the issue of the bankability. But within the climate context, we often look at both the financial and the sort of social environmental benefits to developing this project. So, for example, within my presentation, I would discuss the importance of including the various social dimensions within your activities, and whether it be in terms of, ensuring the gender balance, disabilities, children, youth, and so on, and ensuring that you are bringing a social benefit to it. So within the climate change project space, it goes beyond simply just the financial aspect to it, but generally it will encompass both social and environmental. I know oftentimes maybe if it's been pushed projects towards the private sector, then there'll be more of the keen looking at the profit aspect to it. But generally within the climate change context, we look at it both in terms of the social benefits to it. And that is why it's important to integrate that social benefits within social dimensions within the project activities and so on. Yeah.
I hope he responded to your question. If you have any more questions, please, you could just show by raise of hand or send it in via chat. From Tumelo, Tumelo has sort of a suggestion. Says, I think for one, we can be the ones who find out what the government has to offer and share that information with our peers or with schools in our communities.
Yeah, and of course, I think that is.
Go on.
Yeah. No, I think I totally agree with that. It's important that we have a role to play, and I think sort of Smelo is probably highlighting the role in which we can play. And like I said, knowledge sharing is important because you'll be surprised how there are various positive experiences, best practices which can be learned from each other. And yeah.
Okay, there's a question from Branson. He says, hi, Henry. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. My question is regarding finding climate funds. Are there any organizations that have a database or a holistic list of youth climate funds? I think you gave an amazing overview of tips of how to improve applications, but I am still confused on how to find opportunities.
Yeah.
And I think, Henry, before you respond, I joined one of the sessions during the African Climate Week in Gabon, Libreville. And one of the panelists that represented the AFDB, he specifically mentioned how some funders are saying that they cannot find projects, while project owners are saying that they cannot find funding in the same ecosystem. So there's still that gap, and I think that's also what Branson is trying to communicate here. So there are funders that would even say that there's a portfolio of projects that they can't fund, maybe small scale projects. They want projects that run into trillions. But some of these organizations are probably startup organizations that possibly just need $10,000. And so there was also the conversation on are there possibilities to start to aggregate these small projects owners, sort of a cooperative or something, where all of them come together, seek for this funding, and then they can now execute based on the amount of funding that they need per project.
Yeah, that is actually it's an existing, I would say, a gap that exists, a disconnect between the funding lines, and you have people on one end asking for the funding, and you have the funding lines which say they don't get applications, and oftentimes you see they have to be extending the application period in some cases, and often that is an indication where they just do not have enough applications for that. And I remember previously there was this session we did along green entrepreneurship, and that was something which came up as well. And one of the questions was that, is there a space to develop these central, again, online central hubs, maybe from a regional standpoint, which has these funding sort of consolidates, so where various funding lines can, have this stuff listed there. Because I know there are various sites available around, but often it's disjoint, and maybe what they're offering is not kind of you may be aware of, but then it's not your area of focus. I was just trying to get one. There was one I saw recently, which has almost like a global, I think it's Youth Lead or so. I'll try to get the link before I set off on the session, where it essentially gives you per country, per region, and so on. But of course, I think there was a need to keep this updated. So maybe this is something I think that I sort of proposed that previously, that there is a need to see whether it can be developed, maybe more on the regional level, where you have this sort of regional climate finance hub. I don't want to use the word hub from what we do, but climate finance portal or something, whereby let's say a very particular funding line from a private sector entity maybe wants to fund something along the lines of energy, would then put that there. So then you as an organization now can then look for, okay, energy focus, health, and then be able to see what is available within the Asian region, what is available within Europe and so on. Like I said, I know there are all over, but it's very disjoint, and that is where the challenge is. So maybe it is something I think potentially we can look forward to later on. So you're therefore both the funders and those seeking funding can be in one space. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from, a contribution / question from Vinayak. I hope I pronounced that right. He says, the developed countries agreed to provide climate financing to the developing and third world countries. However, they did not fulfill their obligation, but they expect us to shoulder the responsibility equally, not on the basis of common, but differentiated responsibility rule. And then he put a question mark there. Is this a part of the Western hegemony extravaganza? You're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
Yeah, I mean, this is something, of course, that comes up at various levels in terms of the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR. And I think it's a case where, of course, we know that, there are countries which are the developing countries which are most vulnerable, like we've identified. And there's the calls for the sort of, ensuring that the 100 billion, which we call for annually, is actually met by the developed world. But of course, at the same time, I know like I said, there was that increase in pressures on the developing countries to play their role as well. But I think, it's I don't know whether it's part of Western extravaganza, but I think we're getting to a stage. What I can say is that I think we're getting to a stage where, and again, I'm a young person as well, so I think we're getting to a stage where there is an increased understanding that, and now that we have sort of more data, which sort of shows that it's becoming clearer that there is the role between what the developed world needs to do and the developing countries need to do. I think, and of course, it can be a very contentious issue, and those who have been involved around COP can tell you that. But I think we're getting to a stage where I think the safe answer I can say is that we're getting to a stage where I think there is a difference in understanding what the developed world needs to do and what the developing countries need to do. And that is why sort of within my question, which I would have shared, is that what is the role of young people in particular? This is it's about understanding the different roles. So I think, yeah, it's a case where there is always that challenge, a very contentious issue. But I think we're getting to a stage where there's that very difference in understanding it.
All right, thank you. We have 2 questions here, but then we have about 4 minutes before we go on our break. So I'll just quickly run through them. This is from Bailey. He says, hi, Henry, as the climate crisis is a very real experience for many in the Caribbean, do you know of any climate and gender related funding opportunities, as well as any research for the same topic within the Caribbean?
Yeah. Like I said, yeah, there's a case where I mean, there are for some facilities available, they're just from the what you call the national end. So, for example, whether it be funded by various governments. So there's this gender project going on in the Caribbean region, being funded by Canada and a few UN agencies as well. But I think the challenge is always that it's a bit disjointed. There's not that central this repository of funding facilities which we've been asking for. It could be done by a region as well, the Caribbean central, funding thing. So it's quite thing. But what I will do, I'm just trying to get it from my email once I'm signed off, and I'll share the link in the chat of this funding line, because I used it previously. I think it's Youth Leader, so I just can't recall the exact name, but I'll share it with you. But it was quite useful. It was one of the best I've seen. So it's not perfect, but it's one of the best which I've seen so far, which has various funding lines. Some of it are outdated, but even if it's outdated, one thing that's important to know is that even if it may have seen, I may have been for 2021, but then it's something you can actually keep in your calendar to look forward to for the next year. So when the calls for applications come through, it can be expected. So you don't have to be rushing and developing a project concept and so on. But then you have, so it's always good. It doesn't matter if it's a bit, past, but it's also useful as well for your future planning. So you know which are the funding lines you can target as you develop your annual plans and so on. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question here from Shamim. It says, why is it that funders have to dictate what is to be done with the finances they issue out? This doesn't solve the problem.
I think trying to get the question. Yeah, why is it?
It's the last question.
Yeah, this doesn't solve.
I think it was Shamim who had asked before.
It's like informally, I can say it's a case where it's a good question in the sense that
yes, very.
It's a funders have to dictate. It's a sense that it's just like, if I'm giving you the money, then I tell you what to do with it.
Tell you what to do with
that's the informal response. Yeah, don't put me on that. But I think it's a case where in developing your project activities, there are various ways I would say that you can actually, you're not being deceptive, but you can actually ensure that whatever your main objective, and that's why it's important to know when I spoke about having that sort of wider plan. So you have a clear idea of what is your vision for you looking to achieve. And I think if you have that, you can integrate it within your various project activities. So maybe I can use an example. There are some which don't mind, they actually tell you good things what to do. There are some I know which tell you previously, you ensure that you have 50% of your participants must be female, 50% must be male, that kind of thing. So it's not all good, it's not all bad. So what some would detect, not bad, but it's not all difficult. What sometimes they would dictate to you. Some can actually make it quite useful into the criteria they outline. And I think in most cases, the criteria outline are quite oftentimes very good in terms of ensuring that you have a holistic project, because I think even from the funders line, they want to be able to show that they've had a greater impact. And of course, I think they'd want to ensure that you have wide stakeholder engagement and so on. I think, yeah, it doesn't solve the problem, but I think it's a case where if every organization with 6 funding were able to dictate their own terms, then maybe a bit controversial. Yeah.
I think sometimes, let me just chip this in before we go on our break. Sometimes funders have things that they're targeting in line with their interests. And so they want whatever projects that they're funding to also help elevate whatever it is, whatever image they generally want to portray of themselves as an organization, as an institution. And so I recall one of the panelists as well said something about, wow, your project idea may be beautiful, great, bankable and all. However, you need to, when you're approaching a funder, be sure that this is what the funder is interested in. Else you may not get any funding but still doesn't mean that your idea is not great. Thank you so much, Henry, for this session. You're free to either leave after now or still stay for the next session. It's your choice. And to everyone who has stayed on up until this time, thank you so much. We'll be having a short health break for 10 minutes, and we'll be back by exactly an hour, 10 minutes, okay, 9 minutes from now. So I'll just leave us engaged with some very calm Saturday music. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you can all hear that, the music. So we'll be back in 9 minutes. Okay, Solomon says he can hear. Hello, everyone. Break is over. Let's stop sharing this. Yes, we're back. And while we're waiting for our next speaker, I would invite Miriam, who would explain to us how the breakout room would work. So we'll just break out briefly into our different countries, and once our next speaker comes on, we'll come back. Miriam, if you're here. Okay,
here.
there she is. Okay.
Thank you very much. So I hope you still have the document for the breakout rooms. Guys, first of all, thank you very much for the presentations. And yeah, so if you have your the document for the breakout rooms, it would be great if you can choose the room, choose your numbers, your country's number, and if not, if that would be difficult, I could also rename them in a second, so that we can start. You can start exchanging with your group members until the next speaker begins. Here they are. And again, you can gladly tell me if you do not know which number it was, and I will let you know.
Miriam, there's some questions coming in via the chat. So what number is Madagascar?
Yes. I can see them. One second.
Yeah.
Okay, so China is number 1. Haiti is. I'm also.
So let me help you type them. China number 1.
Just a second.
You could check for Haiti.
Okay. So again, China is yeah, it's okay. I can write them.
Okay.
China is number 1. Number 2 is Indonesia. Number 3 is Kazakhstan.
For those that are just joining, we're going into our breakout rooms.
Haiti is number.
So if you know your numbers, you could just join
19.
the breakout room.
Haiti is number 19. Palau is number 17. That is correct. And Iran is number 7. And Madagascar is number 20.
Hello, this is Nancy Sage. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Hi.
Hi,
Whereabouts
Nancy.
are you in the agenda? Hello, I was having a bit of difficulty joining, but seems that it's worked now. I think I was clicking on the wrong link, so sorry about that.
No problem.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Nancy.
So where we currently are in the agenda, we're going to be working in working groups now, so that the members can get to know each other. And after that, we will continue on with our next presentation. So you can gladly start working on the projects in the working groups, or just get to know each other. And
yeah, I think for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. So Nancy
exactly.
starts the session.
That's fine. Just let me know when you want me to start. I'll just stay here by my computer. So I did just send a few. I managed to put together this morning a few slides. Just sent them to you. So if that's useful, then somebody could show those when we get to my intervention. Otherwise, I'll just stand by and wait for you to tell me when to start. Okay?
All right.
Okay.
Shah, I think there's a misunderstanding there. You don't join the country you are from, but the country you are working on in the group. I will send the link to the document again so that you can all see your group number. Okay. I've just sent link in the chat. Can you join 16? I don't know, Shah. Where is your name? I can quickly check. I mean, haven't you joined the group yet? I can't find your name. Okay. No, everyone with the link should be able to access it. Okay, I can edit that. Okay, now you should be able to access it. Here, I'm sending it in again. Chat is number 9. You can find this in the document. And Joseph, again, I hope you're referring to the group you're working on and not the country you're from. Yes, I apologize. Have I said 9? This is incorrect. Sorry. I misread it. Chile is 9. Chile.
So
Okay,
Miriam, I think we'll end the breakout session in 4 minutes, so Nancy can start her presentation.
okay.
I'll share with you the PowerPoint slides that she sent via email, so you could share your screen.
Mhm.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I will go around in the breakout rooms for a second and come back. So are the people who are unassigned, do you have a country to work on, or haven't you just joined because you don't want to? Okay.
Hello.
Hi. No,
Can
you
you-
have the country you are working on in your project. So there's this document I've sent in the chat. You should be able to find your name under country. And that is the one you should be joining, the group number of it. Okay, so if that doesn't work, it is also no problem. We may be able to do that again at the end. And I will then rename the groups if that is a little inconvenient for you guys to be choosing the number instead of the name. But I would ask you until the end of the session to just look at this document and find your name and see which country you've been assigned to be able to join that respective country. Okay.
Miriam, can you confirm that you've received what I sent
I have not received
via
it.
WhatsApp? Or you could share your email and I would.
No, I haven't received it yet.
I sent it via WhatsApp.
Oh, okay.
Or I could also forward via email.
Oh, no, it's okay. Got it.
You got it?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I
So I
just did
think
a
that-
reply to all. Sorry, I didn't realize I didn't have Miriam. I don't think I actually had her email. Sorry about that.
No, it's totally fine. All right.
Okay, so I think they can all start rejoining the general room. So we could start off.
It will end in 60 seconds and then we can start.
Yeah.
So I'm planning to turn this into a slightly more, that the change is a positive opportunity for them to ask me more questions, because I had less time to prepare what I was going to say. So there's more time for them to quiz me on anything they want to ask me. And I hope that's, hope that will go well. We'll see. Just to ask you, I mean, people can write questions in the chat, but how are you handling questions in the meeting? Are you preferring that I read the chat, or is somebody like Miriam or yourself going to hand the questions to me? I don't mind whichever way you prefer, how you've been doing it so far in the academy.
I think this
Yes.
is up to you. You choose if you want to read the questions yourself or we read it for you.
Okay, well, when we get to that, maybe I'll have a look at the questions, but then also maybe if people want to, I don't know, how many people do you actually have in the academy today? Roughly.
We have around
As we
70.
speak is 68.
Okay, then I think putting
think
their
people are
hand up
still
is not really
joining.
going to work. So I think let's go with some written questions. And if people really want to ask a verbal question, then they could put a question. But then I might need some help from you to look down, because if there's 68 people writing questions, it may be quite a lot to look at. So let's see how it goes, okay?
Yeah, we have you covered, Nancy. Thank you.
Can you all see my screen, guys?
Yeah.
Yes, I can see it's clear. Yeah. So I think I'd like to start. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us in our academy. She's still on. All right, I would
Yes,
like to
I'm
start
here.
off with, okay, excellent. I'd like to start off with Nancy's biography, or brief profile rather. Nancy Sai, she's a chartered civil engineer who specialized early in her career in transport projects and more specifically in port and coastal work. 25 years ago, she became involved in the discussions in the maritime engineering industry on the challenges of incorporating climate change impacts into the design guidance for maritime projects. This was the beginning of her close interest in climate change. After 13 years of work as a consulting engineer, she pioneered the European Investment Bank in 1998. Nancy was an early founding member of the bank's environmental assessment group, providing the bank's project team with due diligence support on environmental and climate, and was a founding member of the bank's Directorate Climate Working Group and Adaptation Group. Following her move to the bank's Environment, Climate and Social Office in 2011, Nancy has a specific role as EIB's Chief Climate Change Expert, supporting all parts of the bank on strategic climate issues. She has been responsible for leading the work on Paris alignment with other MDBs, climate finance definitions and impact reporting, including the carbon footprint of the bank's project portfolio. She also works on the definitions and impact reporting for the bank's green bonds, the EIB's climate awareness bonds, and works closely with other finance institutions on harmonized impact reporting and climate finance tracking. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Just checking you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Okay, if for any reason the sound doesn't work well, I will turn my camera off. Thank you for inviting me to join the Academy. Just to say that, as you probably know, the other previous speaker and myself were both going to be speaking to you next week, and we were asked if we could do it this week, which means I'm doing it from my parents' spare room in the UK, which also means that the Wi-Fi might be not quite up to scratch, and therefore, as I said, if it all goes a bit dodgy on the sound, let me know, I'll turn the video off. It also means that the set of slides I've put together is a little bit kind of a quick run through, but in fact, this gives us an opportunity to have more time for questions, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions you have. So if I could have the next slide, please.
Yes, 1 second, it's still, yes, that is.
Okay, so again, this is a bit of a mishmash of a few slides I've put together just to give us a kind of basis to have a conversation. This is actually the bank's commitments. And I think I actually was looking and could not find in the time I had a slide that explains who the EU bank is. So I'm going to just start by doing that introduction so you know who I work for. So the EIB, European Investment Bank, is a global multilateral development bank. It's actually the only other global multilateral development bank apart from the World Bank, but I'm not pretending that we are the World Bank. We are, in terms of development finance, obviously much smaller than the World Bank. And that's because we do 90% of our finance, including 90% of our climate finance, well, 85 to 90% in the EU. And that's because we're owned by all the European Union member countries. And we obviously have a mandate for working there. But we have a very important development mandate where we work in pretty much every developing country, emerging economy all around the world. And we work there with mandates given to us by the EU, which are development mandates, but also sometimes partnership mandates in some of the countries that are nearby to the EU. And in all of those external mandates and in the EU, climate is an absolutely critical part of what we've been doing for quite a few years. And because of that, a few years ago, we were asked effectively to step up and be the EU's climate bank. Now, this does not mean that every single thing we do is a climate finance project, far from it. We have many different objectives, for example, health and education, developing support for innovation. We have also different types of financing. So in the developing countries and emerging economies, we have a specific role where we are asked to support and strengthen the financial system in those countries by working with local banks and so on. So we do have other objectives, but climate is absolutely vital. And here you see the summary, if you like, of the big key things that the bank committed to turn itself into the climate bank. And it's still a work in progress. It's still something we're working on, and we're transforming ourselves into the climate bank. Primarily, there are three big parts to it in a way. One is our energy lending policy made clear, and this is a global commitment that we basically no longer finance traditional fossil fuel investments. Now, that's all around the world. And in fact, what it means is we actually want to use our resources and use our financial resources and our expertise to focus all efforts that we can on renewable energy, energy efficiency, storage, and electrification, transmission and distribution, and so on. And that's what we chose to do. And so that is actually in our energy lending policy, which is a global policy. But over and above that, and moving away from energy, we also committed to put our climate action target, which was for 35% in developing countries. We put it up to 50%, more to exceed 50% by 2025. But we also changed it from climate action to climate action and environmental sustainability, which includes biodiversity finance, sustainable water, depollution, circular economy. So you might think of it what most people would probably call green finance. But still, at the moment, I mean, if I look at our figures from last year, it's over 90% is climate finance. And that, as I said, that means that the other 50% of what we do has to be for other EU development objectives. And obviously, outside the EU, it's primarily focused on delivering the SDGs. But the other big thing, and this is where I want to make an important distinction that we said was, we're going to align all of our operations, all of our activities with the Paris Agreement. And I'll come back to what this means. So in the language of the bank, the way we look at it is we've set ourselves a target for climate finance, green finance. That's to finance the activities that really help solve the climate and environment problems that we're facing on the planet, but that everything we do has to be Paris aligned. And so that's the way we look at it. The Paris alignment is everything, and the climate finance is the focus on this 50% that really provides a sort of substantial solution to the climate and environmental problems. And importantly, we strategically aligned everything we're doing with the 1.5 degrees temperature goal in the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. Now, we didn't do this alone. We did a lot of work together with all the other multilateral development banks, the MDBs, on Paris alignment. And you may know, I don't know whether you know, but actually at COP24 in Katowice, we published something called the 6 building blocks framework that all the multilateral development banks agreed to as to how we would build the Paris alignment into all our activities. And of course, it's driven by Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement. So as far as we're concerned, it doesn't say some financial flows. It doesn't say public or private financial flows. It says make financial flows. So that's all financial flows. And that's the way the MDBs looked at it. We actually started by asking ourselves the question, well, what financial flows do we have? And that led us to sort of brainstorm and work on how we might cover all these different things. Next slide, please. Now, I don't know if you've seen this one, but that lovely picture on the right is, in fact, the MDB's 6 building blocks. And because it's so important, and it's so important to understand how climate finance fits in there, I'm going to very quickly run through them. But I'll provide these slides to your Academy organizer so you can look up all the resources. And in fact, of course, we're going to be doing an update on all of this at COP27. So there'll be new links and new presentations. But at the moment, these link to COP26 presentations. So as I said, we started by thinking about what finance flows do we have as an MDB. And of course, you have new operations, but you have your existing operations. You have your internal operations, then you have money that's being paid back to you by the clients. You have money that's going out. You have money that you raise, maybe depending on how you raise finance on the capital markets. For example, we sell bonds, as do most of the other MDBs, to raise finance, which we then disperse out through loans or other investments. So having thought about all of that, we came up with these. And if you want to read the longer version, you can click on one of the links. But primarily, building block 1 says that all new operations must be compatible with the temperature goal, and that we need to identify and manage transition risk in our existing portfolio. Then building block 2 says the same thing, but for the climate resilience goal. So all new operations should be climate resilient, and we need to identify and manage physical climate risk in our existing portfolio. Now, we thought about combining that into one big giant building block, if you like, because it's not optional. You can't say, well, I'm going to align with the temperature goal and I'm here, and over there I'm going to align with the resilience goal. You have to do both. Paris alignment is both. We thought about joining them up, but then we realized if you do that, adaptation will always take a second seat. It will always be thought about afterwards, because that's always what happens. Everybody always goes straight to the mitigation. So we decided to keep them separate so that building block 1 and building block 2 are equally important. Now, building block 3 is climate finance. And here I just really want to make sure that I explain properly that for us and for the other multilateral development banks, this is not the same thing as Paris alignment. Climate finance is part of Paris alignment, because simply making sure that everything you do is compatible with the Paris goals will not get us there. We also need, as public development banks, to be focusing a certain amount of our effort on the things that really help provide the solutions. So each MDB has its own targets. They set them depending on their mandate and on the requests from their shareholders, but we all have a target of some sort for climate finance. And building block 3 is about that climate finance, but it's not just about volume. It's about doing more climate finance, mobilizing more private finance for climate finance, helping our clients develop climate projects so that we can finance them. It's basically everything that accelerates the transition that we need through climate finance. Building block 4 is about strategic support to our clients. So it's basically acknowledging that whatever project we're financing, and most MDBs are financing a project, there's a client. That client might be a country, it might be an energy authority, it might be a corporate, it might be a bank. Whoever they are, we need to support them in their plans and strategies. Because if we don't support them in their climate plans and strategies, then we are not going to all be able to help drive the agenda towards making finance flows compatible with Paris. Number 5 is reporting. It's about impact reporting. It's about being transparent about what we're doing on Paris alignment. And we actually have shared an outline of a framework for reporting at the last COP, and we'll be giving some update on that. But that's really about being transparent and showing everybody what we're doing on the whole of Paris alignment. And the last one is what you might call walk the talk, put your own house in order, which is look at your own internal activities, whether it's buildings, travel, what does your pension invest in? How does your treasury invest? What do they do when they're holding funds for other people? All those questions. What about green procurement, etc.? All those things come into building block 6. It's basically the internal Paris alignment of the MDBs. Now, having said that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And I'm going to come back to the EIB. So what we did was, having made these big commitments, which our boards agreed to, more than 50% climate action and environmental sustainability, Paris alignment of all activities, we created something called the Climate Bank Roadmap. We also updated our climate strategy, but the Climate Bank Roadmap is really putting all the details. How are we actually going to do this? And it goes through sector by sector, how we're going to look at each sector from Paris alignment. It looks at how we're going to accelerate support for clients. It looks at how we're going to accelerate more effort on adaptation. It commits to a number of different things. It also says that we were going to start using the EU taxonomy to track our climate finance, because we're starting to try and see how what we do, which is up till now always been harmonized with other MDBs, fits in what the wider financial system is doing on climate finance. So the CBR is a big document. I think it was probably the thing in my 24 years at the bank, I've never seen anything mobilize the whole bank in the same way as this. But it really had absolutely everybody involved. And of course, as I said, it's a global roadmap. So it looks at what we're doing in all the countries where we operate. Importantly, there are other things that go with it. One of them is updating our environmental and social standards and framework, which is bringing biodiversity and some other aspects in to have, in a way, an equal weight with climate, which I think is very important. But the other thing I wanted to highlight is that in the Climate Bank Roadmap, there's a very strong emphasis also on the social issues and just transition. And I think it's really important to remember, which I'm sure those of you that are from developing countries, but indeed most young people around the world, including my own children, are well aware that ultimately the planet would be fine. It might look different, it might have a different temperature, and nature might take some time to recover. But the real question is, can this one species, can we live on this planet safely and healthily, and can we hand this planet on to our children and grandchildren so that they can also live on it safely and healthily, and without sort of destroying the very system that we all depend on for our lives and well-being. So we are also looking very closely at the issue of employment and just transition issues, but also social issues, just much more generally, how that fits with climate finance. Next slide, please. I think I'm coming to the end, and then we can have some questions. So one thing we committed to do, I won't go into lots of detail on, we committed to develop a special adaptation plan, which we have done. You can see some points there, but you can also find it online if you want to search for EIB.org adaptation plan. It's the first time we've had a specific adaptation plan. And you might say, well, why is it only 15% of the climate action? Part of that is because, in fact, one of the things that's important about the way we track climate finance is it's a granular method. And there are much less projects that are, if you like, 100% adaptation, in the same way that wind farms, cycle paths, all renewable energy, metros, electric buses, all those things are 100% mitigation. So for us to go to 15% is already quite a big step up. I know that some MDBs do have a 50% a parity, but because of the kind of bank we are, we've committed to go towards 15%. And in fact, that is, if you look over the last 5 years, that's actually tripling our adaptation. So it's not going to be easy. You may think it should be more, but still that was a big step for us. The other really important thing in there is, again, support for clients, all types of clients, public and private, to help them do their climate risk and vulnerability assessments, whether it's on a project or within their organization. So that's a very big part. And then working in partnership with others on adaptation, like the Global Commission on Adaptation and so on. And in fact, our president was at the big meeting in Rotterdam, I think it was last week or the week before. And I really was very glad that he went, and he was signaling that the EIB is really stepping up on adaptation, and particularly supporting countries and clients on their adaptation plans. Next slide, please. Now, this is interesting because this is a response to a lot of stakeholder feedback. Stakeholders were adamant that we cannot just look at the climate project that we're looking at. We cannot just look at that project. We have to look at what the client is doing as a whole, especially when we're financing corporates or financial corporates like banks. We can't just look at the project anymore. We have to look at the whole client and their operations. So we've developed this, which is called PATH, because it's about, people say, what does it stand for? I'm afraid it doesn't stand for anything. I've tried to think what it could stand for. Paris alignment, that's helpful, maybe. But anyway, it is about pathways, and it is about clients who are in highly emitting or highly vulnerable sectors. And we are asking them that, regardless of what we're financing, we require them to develop their own plans and report on them publicly. Now, that's really a first for MDBs to be asking that. Two things are interesting. One, it's 1.5 degrees compatible plans. Two, it's resilience as well as, greenhouse gas plans. And three, we are trying not to label clients into good or bad clients. We're also saying, if you don't have a plan that's 1.5 degrees compatible, then you have to explain to your shareholders, to us, and publicly how you're going to move towards that. So the whole idea is to incentivize better transition plans from the clients. Next slide, please. I think we're getting to the end. Sorry, I don't have a paper version. This is our climate finance from last year. It is actually audited now. So if you look for our sustainability report, which I think you'd probably find by going eib.org sustainability report 2021, you'll actually find the audited figures, which might be very slightly different. But you can see the small adaptation figure on the left, which is one of the reasons why we've got to do a lot more. But you can see basically how it spreads across different types of financing. And some of you may be more interested than some things than others. Some of you may be very interested in innovative research. Some of you might be interested in energy efficiency, which can be very small scale or very big scale. Some of you might be interested in low carbon transport. You can see there roughly how it spreads out across our whole climate finance that we did last year. Next slide, please. Okay, last thing is to say that we have been a development bank around the world for 50 years. And after some thought and examination and an external group of wise people who opined on what we should do, we have actually decided to not exactly separate, but make the part of the bank that works on the development finance on the outside EU countries into its own special entity. It's called EIB Global. And also, as part of that, we are doing a lot more rolling out more technical and financial advisors on the ground. So our offices are being increased in number in developing countries, and also we're putting more technical experts, including climate experts and financial experts, into those offices so that there can be more direct support to clients. Next slide. I think this is the last one. This is just to say that obviously climate is still one, and it comes number one in the EIB Global priorities, but it absolutely is not the only thing. And I just want to highlight that for us, climate is critical. We have to have climate in everything we do, but it does not mean that we only do climate finance. We're still very, very involved in health and education, in job creation, in innovation and research and development, all these kind of things, but they must all be Paris aligned. So the grandfathering period for Paris alignment is over. From now on, every new operation has to be compatible with our Paris alignment approach. And I think the next one is just questions. Yep.
Thank you.
Over to you. However, whatever you want to ask me. I realized I forgot to mention that we do lots of different kinds of financing. So we do loans, like most banks, but we also do equity investment. We invest in funds. We work with microfinance institutions. We reach out to small and medium-sized businesses through local banks, sometimes specialized local banks like agricultural banks, sometimes just local commercial banks. And we really use all different kinds of financial instruments in development finance as well, not just in the EU, to reach public and private entities. And as I said, the public entities can be anything from the country to a national authority to a city. We do a lot of funding with cities, and sometimes we reach small municipalities through local banks when, by packaging things together and working with local banks. So just to give you a flavor of all the different kinds of financing we can do.
Thank you, Nancy. If you hadn't mentioned that you did this slides, you made the slides in a rush, we definitely wouldn't have noticed. Is it just me? Miriam, would you like to second that? Because
no, the slides were amazing, and the
Thank you so
presentation
much.
was awesome, really.
Of
Unfortunately,
course.
I can't raise my hand, but if there aren't any questions,
There are questions. There are loads of questions. I think we should
Miriam,
start
why
taking
don't you
them.
ask your question while I'm opening the chat and having a look at the question?
Okay.
All right, then maybe I wanted to ask about loss and damage, because you talk about mitigation and adaptation, and then loss and damage is not mentioned at all. Are there any investments in that area?
So loss and damage is an incredibly important topic, but ultimately it is still part of the negotiations in UNFCCC. And it is about, of course, as we all know, how do you compensate for the fact that many countries experiencing the impacts of climate change actually didn't and still haven't emitted hardly any greenhouse gas emissions. The issue there is about compensation, and the countries have to come to some agreement. There isn't at the moment something that you could finance. I mean, we would be doing things perhaps as resilience projects or whatever, but loss and damage itself is a compensation issue. So it's possible that at some point when that loss and damage issue is resolved and all the countries come to a conclusion as to how it should be handled, that there might be a role for the MDBs in supporting whatever is decided needs to be done. But it is not at the moment for the MDBs to be involved in that discussion on how the compensation arrangement, whatever is decided for loss and damage, should be decided. Having said that, obviously our shareholders, the EU, they are signatories to the Paris Agreement. So the EU itself is obviously involved in those negotiations, as are all the other signatories. So that's all I can say at the moment. I would say the MDBs will stand ready to see what they can do at that time. But we can't, it's not our place to be in that negotiation. It's for our shareholders who need to find how that should be resolved.
And I mean, you referred to loss and damage in terms of compensation, but there's also the actual loss and damage that is currently happening in developing countries, like floods, or maybe investing in warning systems, or
yes, all of that we can do and should do and do try to do. And all of the MDBs are doing more on adaptation. Nearly everybody, I think, in their 2025 targets that they've already set themselves have set to do more on adaptation. So absolutely. And one of the challenges, of course, is how do you do that in the least developed countries when maybe that country doesn't have perhaps the financial capacity to actually take the action that might build the resilience. So we do have to think about that, and we then obviously ideally we can blend with grants and try and make sure that the right kind of finance is available. So the actual investments, yes, and we can be doing them regardless of whether they are a part of loss and damage. The actual dealing with disasters. I would say that normally whenever there is a disaster, normally the EIB would be there, as are other multilaterals, not only with the immediate aftermath, but also with longer term building back better. So that's something I mean, obviously it's going to be more as we go forward. There's so much change built into the climate. We can't stop it, even if we were to stop emitting now. So we will need to be prepared for more extremes, and we will need to think how that's why it's really important that every project we do now, regardless of what it is, builds in resilience as much as we can. You can't build against everything, but you can try and build in as much as you can, and warning systems are a very important low-hanging fruit. Warning systems and shelters and evacuation schemes and all those things are super important. Also supporting healthcare and hospitals to be prepared for these types of things, whether it's more extreme heat where you get more people suffering from heat exhaustion, or whether it's just people being injured from flooding or whatever. So yes, I think there's a lot that we are doing, but I suspect there will be more demands on us to do more. I mean, it won't be just in Pakistan, which obviously is already a really terrible situation. It will be in every country. It will be different in every country, but for sure we will be looking to do more adaptation. Yeah.
We have loads of questions here,
okay,
so I'm thinking we could just, rush
okay,
through them.
I'm looking down. How do you support?
Okay, so do I just read the questions to you, or you find?
No, I'm reading them. So I'll just go down as quick as I can. So
okay.
Private sector organizations, we've got a couple of things we're doing. One is directly through the PATH framework. So when companies need to develop their Paris alignment plan, it might include how they do more green finance as well. It's usually more the other way. It's more how do they move away from things that are not compatible. But it could be that it would include green finance as well. Now, when we come to banks and financial intermediaries, definitely we have quite a lot of technical assistance we're doing for local banks on how they can roll out more green finance, how they can work with their clients to have more investments and have maybe a package, a product, green finance products that they can offer. And we're doing quite a lot of that technical assistance in North Africa, in the countries to the east of the EU, and I foresee that we will be doing that more globally as well. SIDS, yes. The challenging point about SIDS, and to be perfectly honest, most of what we do is lending. And sometimes it's blended, so it can be, subsidized, but it's still lending. And the problem with a lot of very vulnerable countries, some of the SIDS are middle income, but some of them are actually quite indebted already. And then that question comes, well, how then do we help them if they may already be at their debt limit that they're allowed to borrow? It is a challenging question, and I was in Egypt last week at the ICF. The incoming COP presidency were talking about that, and there was a lot of interest in debt swaps. I don't know whether that will help, but one other thing I could say about SIDS is, because they're small, you usually need to look at it from a regional or in a group. So for example, we've been working for years with the Caribbean Development Bank in the Caribbean to try and roll out resilience and adaptation, and to support the entities in those SIDS making resilience plans. And we found that by working with the Caribbean Development Bank, it was quite effective because some of the islands are very small. I think we've seen the same thing being done by the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank in the Pacific, looking, working with a group of countries. So I think that's also one thing that's quite important when you talk about SIDS. Hang on, I'm just going down my list of questions. We don't do grants. We sometimes work with people offering grants, and then we combine them with loans, but we don't do just grants. That's not a business model that we have. I'm going down. Yes, commercial banks. They do have to commit to passing on the financial benefit to the underlying companies. They absolutely do. And if it's subsidized, of course, that's even more important. So yes, the commercial banks in countries are required in the contract to pass the benefit on to the small and medium-sized enterprises that they're working with. Path. An example of a client. Well, in the old days, we might have done, for example, an electric charging network or wind farm with a large energy company, maybe even an oil and gas major. Or maybe we were doing some upgrade in one steel plant to a big international steel company. And now, when we do those projects, those clients, because they're in high emitting sectors, would need to commit that within a year they have to develop, or if they have already got it, deliver and make public their plan to be compatible with the 1.5 temperature goals. And in Path, there's quite a lot which explains what we want to see. We want to see not just a long-term target, but ambitious interim targets for 2025, 2030, 2035, to actually make sure that they're on the right path. But interestingly, the same thing with resilience. So if it's a company, let's say it's a water company or an agricultural company, and maybe we're doing a project with them that's, I don't know, a grain silo somewhere, we would require them to be looking at the resilience issues of their whole company, including impacts on other people, not just themselves, but also how their operations affect the resilience of surrounding areas, for example, if you're in agriculture. Oh, and sorry, for banks, for financial intermediaries, they have to commit to reporting under TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that's what we've required for banks and fund managers. And the reason for that is because we felt that that is a really big thing that's happening in the industry, and we wanted to sort of reinforce the acceleration of the use of TCFD reporting. So that's what we decided to do. Okay, so how do the requests come to us? Yes, sometimes they come through countries, but sometimes they come to us from the entity themselves. Sometimes we know the entity, or sometimes we meet the entity at an event and put them in touch with the right geography or the right type of financial officers with deal with those types of clients, whether they're public or private. One of the things I would say, though, and it's important to bear this in mind because it comes up a lot, is for us to be able to finance the entity, whoever it is, they have to be legally able to borrow finance or raise finance. And that does happen sometimes. For example, we have been in some countries where cities are not legally entitled to borrow from us, only the central government is. So with the public entities, there can be issues with whether they are actually allowed to sign a finance contract with us, or whether that has to go through a higher entity of some kind. But in Syria, I don't quite. Adaptation plans. Well, we realize that a lot of the time there are not adequate adaptation plans. Yes. So we do two things. One, as I said, we're looking in path at the company or the entity's whole plan, but also we are on each project. Every single project, which has been now for quite a few years, is screened for physical climate change risks. And then we engage with the client to see, has the client done anything about it? You know, do they need support to do something about it? So that's something that happens on the projects, and that's separate from asking the clients from their plans. So just to let you know about that. But I agree, and we can always do better. And we are finding that we will need to offer technical assistance to a lot of these clients who may not have had good advice and therefore don't know how to build resilience into their project. Right, innovation and research. Well, there's two ways we support innovation and research. One is we do fund universities. So sometimes we do funding through universities to, for example, build new particular research labs or whatever. Sometimes it could be also through companies who are investing in research in new technologies, for example, in energy, or in, for example, we've done a few in drought-resistant seeds. Primarily, it depends on the type of client, but obviously if someone comes to the bank with a project, then they would be directed to whatever kind of the part of the bank that deals with that. So if it's a university sort of research type in research and innovation, it would go to the people who do all the education and university projects. And if it was an industrial research and innovation, it would go to the industry teams who do research and innovation. And in many sectors, we only do research and innovation. So we don't, in many sectors, we only support new developments rather than sort of conventional investments which can easily be supported by commercial banks. We're not there to crowd out commercial banks, so we quite often focus on the innovation. I'm going down. Well, as interesting, you should ask about African development banks. There is a very important work stream that the MDBs are working on together. And I mentioned building block 4, which is how do you support the clients in their plans? So there's a number of different things that we're doing. One, we are looking at how, as a group, we can better support long-term strategy development, because we think if you have good long-term strategy in a country, you can then have not only better NDCs, but also investment plans that roll out. But the bottom line is, I think at the moment, only 2, I may be wrong, but only 2 or thereabouts countries in Africa have long-term strategies. So there's a massive, massive need for us, also African Development Bank and everybody else, to support African countries in their LTS. And in fact, that was highlighted by the African Development Bank at our last meeting that we had on that. So that's really critical. How could we deal with speeding up development that's not aligned to climate action? Well, it doesn't have to be climate finance, but it does have to be Paris aligned, because otherwise you're just undermining it. Now, Paris aligned varies from country to country. So you could have a project which you would say, this is not really Paris aligned in a well-to-do country, but let's take something like recycling. You cannot really discuss recycling very well in a country that doesn't have a waste collection system. You first have to have a waste collection system. Now, you might take a slightly different approach to recycling in a country that already has 100% waste collection across its whole country. So Paris alignment does need to take into account the country context, the risk of lock-in, and a number of other things about how it fits in the country plans. But it's not the same thing as climate finance. So what I would say is development finance doesn't all have to be climate finance, but it does need to be compatible. It needs to be resilient, and it needs to be compatible with the low greenhouse gas pathway of that country. Hang on. Good question, though, because it is important to keep on talking about that. Okay, so our climate finance last year in low and middle income countries was about somewhere between 3 and 4 billion. And we're trying to bring the adaptation to 15%, but it was not 15%. I actually don't know what the exact proportion was for low and middle income countries, but the MDBs publish every year a joint climate finance report, and this will be published very soon, and that will give you all the breakdown on all the data, including for us, so you'll be able to see that. But just right off the top of my head, and I'm sorry, I don't have that paper up here in my mum's spare room, otherwise I might have been able to look. I think it's in my rucksack in the living room. But that report will be published and you'll be able to see. But the total climate finance was somewhere between 3 and 4 billion dollars. Percentage. How does it trickle to the most vulnerable? It doesn't. That is why normally you really need to focus on how you do that. And you normally need technical assistance. Even if you go into a country that is, let's say, a lower income country, it still may not get to the most vulnerable unless that project is specifically focused on that. So, for example, I give you an example. We are one of the first funders of a big developing country adaptation fund called CRAFT. I think it's the Climate Resilience and Adaptation Fund for Technology. So it's about services and technologies. It's not about infrastructure. And it's about rolling out those into developing countries. Now, there's a big element of technical assistance that goes with that. And it particularly addresses that point. So let me give you an example, because my husband is South African. Imagine you go into South Africa and you're going to work on making agriculture more climate resilient, and you're going to have all these different innovative ideas that can be rolled out in South Africa. Unless you specifically set out to try and reach small scale subsistence farmers, obviously a fund which has to make money for its investors is going to end up talking, at least to start with large agricultural companies. So the only way you can actually make sure it gets to the most vulnerable is to have technical assistance support to help them do that, because otherwise it doesn't happen. So to be perfectly honest, it won't trickle down. You have to proactively make sure and build into your environmental and social management system that it needs to look at the most vulnerable. Otherwise, even in cities in Europe, unless you're careful, you end up, building lots of good things in the bit of the city that's doing well. And maybe the bit of the city that houses, for example, Roma people, who are probably much more vulnerable and are probably somewhat excluded in some countries from a lot of good infrastructure, will not be included in the resilience plan. So it's not something that trickles down. It has to be built in. And happy if you want to call us out on that, or ever point out to us that we haven't done that, because we try, but we don't always get that perfect. Different stakeholders. Well, two things. One, we try ourselves to reach stakeholders, but also we have an important part of our environmental and social standards is about stakeholder engagement that the client has to do. And it's an extremely important part of what we ask for. And also we have a zero tolerance for any retribution against whistleblowers or reporters of infringements. And so we require stakeholder engagement in a proper way to be done by the clients. But we also ourselves, if there is any issue that's raised, then we will obviously engage ourselves to try and understand what are the stakeholder issues, and maybe organize stakeholder meetings if that's necessary. Debt swaps. Okay, I'm not an expert in debt swaps, but the idea is there's a fantastic one, by the way, if you're interested in Nature for Debt Swap. I attended a meeting about this a year ago and I thought it was brilliant. So you can look it up by Googling Belize Nature Debt Swap. So basically you have a country that's indebted, they have some national debt, but they have a resource. The question is, and in this case, Belize has coral reefs and so on. And they basically commit to do preservation of the nature and restoration of the nature. And there are people that invest in that, and they take some of the debt out of the debt and the investors effectively take some of the debt out of the national debt against the commitment that the country is making to restore and protect this nature that they have. So I think it's a very, very interesting example. I was really impressed when I went to an event about it. We are looking at that at the EIB. Are there ways in which we can do that? As I said, we're trying to bring biodiversity up to a similar level of importance as climate. In terms of debt swap generally, the idea is basically that you can you take some national debt and transform it into a different kind of finance through whatever structure, swapping it for some other performance, some other KPI, some other type of investment, which then relieves some of the debt on the country. But if you're interested in the nature for debt, I would have a look at the Belize example. It's really fantastic. I hope it's going well, by the way. I have to say it was a year ago that I heard about it, but I thought at the time that it was very interesting. Whoops, hang on. We're out of time, I see that, but it says current energy crisis. Okay, we do want to invest in green hydrogen, and we do want to invest in investments in developing countries that will support energy resilience and less dependence on fossil fuel generally in the world. There's two big issues with green hydrogen that I think are important to mention. One is obviously green hydrogen is a very important solution for some sectors. Other sectors it's not. So other sectors it's being pushed a bit when really what you need is electrification. So I think it's important that we understand where it's necessary. But the most important thing for me, especially when we talk about developing countries, is that many developing countries have seen their natural resources in the past taken by big corporates. Maybe one or two people in that country got very rich, but nearly everybody else didn't see any benefit. We have to be very, very careful, and the bank is very conscious of this, that big new investments for making green hydrogen, or indeed any other renewable resource which is going to be exported, is not just benefiting the corporate or the people receiving it, but that it actually benefits the country that's using its solar resources and its renewable resources to generate and make the green hydrogen. Is absolutely critical that that's done in the right way, so that we don't end up in a situation where a country is making green hydrogen for export and it still doesn't have enough renewable energy to run its central hospital or its schools. So this is something we're aware of. I think we've been talking with also others. Everybody's aware of that. So it needs to be done properly, but absolutely there's huge potential for that, and we would be financing those projects. And I think that was the last question. Hooray!
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nancy. You literally responded to all the questions. And I think if we all don't mind, can we unmute and actually give Nancy a round of applause? I'll give you guys, please unmute if you can. And yes, thank you so much. He was
Thank you
engaging.
very, very much for inviting me.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I'm in awe of all you young people. Just keep on going, right? Keep on fighting, keep on asking questions, and please, if you're at the COP, please come to the EIB stand or the joint MDB pavilion. Come and say hello. Be delighted to meet any of you that are there. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, everyone. I personally enjoyed the session. Well, it looks like every other person did as well. If you have any more questions, you may as well also send, and we'll try and pass it on to Nancy, I guess. Miriam, do you have anything to say, or would they continue with the breakout room? As far as the academy is concerned, we're about 2 minutes out of the 2 hours mark, so we didn't do so badly with time today, I guess. Yeah, Nancy, over to you.
And the agenda was already to have some extra 30 minutes for the breakout rooms. I would like to regulate everything that like the people who don't have a group now, we should finish this today because so that you can all start working on your project. However, I wanted to also remind you of the attendance form that I've sent in the chat. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
Yeah, I think they have. A couple of people have dropped off the call now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I would kindly ask you to.
Nancy, I see Aya says, I've attended the past 2 sessions, but missed out on filling the forms. I don't know. I think we kept on sharing the link. What happens in that case?
So just to ask around, who would be still here for the breakout sessions? Okay, so 50 people. Then to make sure everyone gets that the countries are clear. 1 second. I would Irene,
Somebody says,
take
Tumelo
over
says,
for a
just
second.
one.
I will be back in 2 minutes.
Okay. So I see Tumelo says, just one of the group members is here. Actually, I think it's best we start working on the group project. So it's easy for us. So if you can wait for a few more minutes, about 30 minutes, that would be well appreciated. The Palau group will be meeting on Google Meet. Please check the WhatsApp group for the link. So if you're in the Palau group, please, you're meeting. I think there's a link that was shared on the group. Would also like to hear how that is going for the group. Please let's all ensure that we fill out the attendance form. It's very important. Okay, so someone is asking if we can just agree on a separate meeting schedule in our WhatsApp group. If you think your group would rather that, please, can you just show by raise of hand? Deciding on when to meet. The most important thing for us is that the project gets done. So yeah, Miriam.
Yes, so here are all breakout rooms, 20 with the countries so that you don't have to look at the numbers for that. Please, if you join a country, do not join your own country.
So Miriam, I'm seeing some things on the group chat. Some groups have gone ahead to decide on their best meeting time and platforms as well. So if your group has already done that, you're welcome to exit the group. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So this is just an extra option for you if you want to start getting to know each other or arrange a meeting to start working on your project. You don't have to join now. It is just an offer.
I hope we all get that.
If you like, it is just
so someone is asking, is there a link to the groups?
Yes.
Actually, we made a general link. We had a general WhatsApp link last week, isn't it? Where everyone.
Yes, we have 2 links. One for the general WhatsApp group, and that should have been provided to you last time. And the other one is in the document. You have a
Do you have the link so you could just share in the chat?
You are in the Morocco group, but your name is missing in the list. Yeah, that is fine. You just join Morocco group. because some people were assigned afterwards. So if your group members do not respond and you do not have someone to work with, we can solve that now by looking at other groups that have less participants, or less group members than 5, and then you could join them.
I think I can stop the recording.